Yo, welcome to FakeWhale Live. We got Frederik Vanhoutte. Is that correct? How do you pronounce that last name?
Vanhoutte, but you did pretty well. I mean,
Vanhoutte.
the most
Right.
English pronunciation is Vanhoutte, which is nice.
Vanhoutte. I like Vanhoutte. Wonderful. Just going to jump right into this. We really appreciate, really appreciate having you with us. Medical radiation expert by day, creative coder by night. I mean, sounds like you're a superhero. But can we get into the medical radiation just right out of the jump? Like, what is that? Like what do you do as this day profession of being a physicist, medical radiation, etc.?
Ooh, right to the hard questions. Okay. Well,
I didn't mean
so
for it to be. I thought this was the simple question. Like, what's your day
no,
job?
it never is a simple question. The thing I compare it with is being a pharmacist, but a very specific role of pharmacist. Like, a pharmacist's responsibilities in a hospital is making sure that the little numbers on the packages are okay and what the doctor is prescribing is what the patient is getting. And the doctor is kind of relying on the packaging to be correct. Well, in the hospitals, we have all kinds of treatments and diagnosis techniques that use radiation. And that's actually our responsibility to make sure that basically these machines are doing what we say they are doing. So that's in general. And then for my part, I'm actually involved in radiotherapy, which is treating cancer with big accelerator machines, which are quite dangerous to use because just like the surgeon's knife, they really do damage, but we have to make sure that the damage is at the right place and at the right amount. So my job day to day mostly is I have patients, but these patients don't know that. I'm behind the screens, so I see a digital representation of the patient, a kind of data model of the patient if you want. And then me and my team, we make sure that we create kind of a treatment for them. And the best way to describe it is as a kind of choreography of these machines, the times, the movements they make, what happens for this specific patient and the specific anatomy and the tumor. We are seeing things like this. And then and of course it's always the physician's responsibility. It's a treatment. So they have to look at these numbers, these colors, these representations that we show them and say, okay, that's the correct treatment. So that's actually my job. So it's actually patient is coming into the hospital, is talking to doctors, is talking to nurses, get some scans done, goes home, 5 days later, come back to the hospital for a whole series of treatments lasting, in some cases, 7 to 8 weeks, daily treatments. And so in that 5 days, we make sure that we actually create that treatment, this little dance the machine is doing around the patient. That's what we are creating. So that's what my job is. And lately, it's more and more organizational. I'm the head of the department. I'm at the head of medical physics in the hospital, in fact. But most of my work is this very patient-specific thing. There's other aspects like routine checks and more boring stuff, but still, it has to be done.
Oh, so I mean that's crazy. I've never spoken to somebody that has a job as like significant as that. It doesn't seem. But so like you're not a physician, right? Like you're not a doctor.
No, I'm not a physician. So I really am a physicist. I know in a lot of countries you have an education which is called medical physicists. Where I'm from Belgium. We don't have that. So I'm a physicist. I'm a solid state physicist. So I spend a lot of time building setups and vacuum equipment and doing experiments. And then I was looking for a job after my PhD. I was this kind of postdoc position, kind of stuck in Belgium. The opportunities to go to abroad were there, but didn't fit the family situation. So we stayed in Belgium. Actually, postdoc is not that much fun. It becomes a lot of administration and writing and helping other people. Okay, that part is fun, but still, you spend less and less time in the lab and designing and building yourself. So, and I was looking for a job, and in one newspaper there was an application for a physicist. I've never saw that. I never saw somebody ask for a physicist. And then I discovered that actually there is this kind of job. which is this medical physicist, which is doing this radiotherapy support or radiology or nuclear medicine. And so went and I got the job. And the only problem was I didn't have the proper degree for it, because I was a solid state physicist, and people are not solid state. They are squishy and messy and all kind of stuff going on and alive mostly. So that's so while I was doing the job, I actually did a kind of biomedical engineering degree that has to come together with it. But that's now almost 20 years ago.
Wow. Like, I liked what you were saying earlier about like this choreography of machines. And so basically, like, you don't have any direct contact with the patient at all. So like, you're basically breaking the person down into data that then your machines can affect the data. And then you give this analysis basically to the physician. And then the physician kind of breaks that down into, like you said, the squishy bits and stuff of what will make sense with the person. Is that kind of a chain of command of what's going on here?
Yeah, actually, no, that's a pretty accurate view. So, if you want to see it a bit more realistically, some less abstract, so you have the typical scans of the patients, which are nowadays 3D scans, a CT scan or MRI scan or other kinds of 3D scans, and those get what we call segmented, contoured. So actually, if you have a scan and you look at the scan with a bit of training, and it doesn't take that much, you will recognize, okay, that's a heart and those are lungs and that's the spine. But for the machines and for the computers, for the planning systems, those are just grayscale values. It's an image. So it doesn't know what is heart or what is spine and then lung. And it's interesting to see what machine learning is doing in that area, because they're trying to train machines to recognize in images what the structures are with some success. But you want 100. In medicine, you want 100%.
Yeah.
You don't want, okay, for this patient, half the liver is being defined as lung, but it will be okay. It doesn't work that way. So there's no acceptable rate of failure, which makes it very hard. But still, these things are coming. So those, for the moment, are manually contoured. So this is something what we call dosimetrists do. They contour that. And so at that moment, you actually have a 3D model of your patient with the organs, the skin, the bones defined. And we use that 3D information geometrically to define where we are coming from, our path. If we want to treat a tumor, we want to not go straight through the heart or avoid going too much to the lungs or intestines, things like that.
Wow.
Sensitive tissue. So there's a purely geometric component to it. And then, of course, there's dose calculation, which is quite complex, in which we need what kind of tissues they are and things like that. And it's that we calculate. And the way the physicians see that is really, they see the medical images they're used to, but there's all kind of color codes on there. There's contour lines on there that shows you, okay, this is where we are coming from. This is where the dose at. These are the levels. And of course, it's their training to really associate these abstract numbers with, for this patient, this will lead to something that's an improvement for the patient. In most cases, cure, what we call curation. So on average, I think we add about, so we have about 2,000 patients a year. We are not that big a center, or radiotherapy patients a year. And I think if you would have to ask for an average effect, I think we add about 15 to 20 years of life to these 2,000 patients where we can help. For other patients, it's mostly a case of pain palliation or getting bleeding to stop and things like that. So there's two sides to the medal. But yeah, your description was pretty right on.
Yeah. It's incredible. Like, that must be very fulfilling as well, like enriching the lives of these people by doing this kind of work. Then, so just to like put a cap on this kind of, and like to simply, just so I make sure I'm understanding that you're doing like what we all hear of, like chemotherapy. That's not even as part of like a cancer treatment, right? Or something like, so you're doing radiation therapy for cancer. You're doing, are you doing like all like CAT scans and shit like that too? Or it's like you go in the tube and scan. It's like, So I'm just trying to make a tangible connection where people like are very familiar with these things, you know, like we all are familiar with these, but then that's kind of the inroad of what you're doing, I guess.
Yeah, so for the patient perspective is, of course, completely different than my perspective. For the patient perspective, and something we always have to remember, because for us it's routine, but it's never routine for a patient. So for a patient, it's really like you have a general physician, something is discovered, unfortunately, you get referred to some kind of specialist. In most cases, it's a bit difficult for people to know where they end up. It might be a pneumologist, it might be an oncologist, and in some areas this is almost the same job. There is something called a multidisciplinary consult, sometimes with the patient present, but sometimes not, where all kinds of medical specialists will discuss the case and will come up with a treatment, and then this is presented to the patient. This can be quite bewildering because you have surgery, which involves the surgeons. You have, like you said, chemotherapy, which involves the medical oncologists, which is a different kind of specialist. You have radiotherapy treatment, which is then radiotherapy oncologists, which are yet another kind of specialist. And for the patient, of course, it's one trajectory. Where we come in, it's really just the radiotherapy part. So for the patients where it has been decided and where the patient accepted, okay, this is a part of your treatment, they will have scans like people have, like there's dozens of scans in the hospital every day, and we start from that data. I lost my thread a bit there, but basically for the patient, it's just a small part of the treatment. It's quite exhaustive part because it's quite intensive. Like for some patients, it's really 7 to 8 weeks having to be in the hospital for 5 days in a week for a treatment that lasts 15 minutes. And just think about your own personal schedule, what it would mean to you to have to fit for the next 7-8 weeks, always this 15 minutes in it, but the time you're going back. So people lose chunks of their day. And the role of radiotherapy is actually very similar to surgery. So it's actually a local treatment. It's really treating the tumor itself. The chemotherapy part, where people are most familiar with, because that's also very long-term, very harsh for the patient. That's actually to treat everything that's spread out in the body. That's a kind of diffuse disease. You don't know exactly where it is. You know it's there because you see here and there a sign, but you know there's definitely a lot more subclinical, which is the fancy term for we know it's there, but we don't see it. So that's what the chemotherapy is doing. So that's why you will, if you talk to patients, we always talk about cancer as if it's a single disease. It's not. Cancer is something very special. It's not a foreign agent. It's not something invading your body. It's your body itself. And for every patient, it's a bit different. Okay, you have categories which are similar, but you can have 2 patients with cancer which has 2 completely different diseases, different treatments, different ways of it evolving. That's what makes it challenging, and that's why, for example, in radiotherapy we have this very patient-specific care. It's not like what you said, the CAT scans. In the CAT scans, you can easily do 60 to 80 CAT scans on a machine per day. All what matters is the patient has to be lying down on that couch, and you do it. We can't do that.
Okay. Interesting. Wow. I didn't expect to learn so much about about radiation therapy and like cancer treatment, honestly. And like what you just said about cancer being specific to every individual is really interesting, honestly. So thank you for all of that. That was fantastic. As you were speaking about like the imaging of the bodies and stuff like that, it was very easy for me to make a connection to like art and digital art, especially. And a lot of the work we're actually seeing these days. So I would like to hear about your specific inroad, I guess, where you, was it art first and then this the physicist thing? You saw the ad in the paper to be a physicist, or was it the physicist first that sparked the interest in the imaging, which brought you to, you know, art and generative etc. Like what was the order of events getting you into visual art?
It was pretty much physics first, and actually it has a very mundane start. It was started around 2000, in the sense that I was finishing my PhD, and we're not going to turn this in another lecture about solid state physics. Let's not do that, because it's also very interesting, but let's not do that. No. So basically, my research was on something called nanogranular metallic magnetic films. So very small structures we made in some way which are in the nanometer scale, which is a billionth of a millimeter, or in other scales, it's pretty much a billionth of an inch also. So it doesn't matter, very small. And we had a microscopy group, but not traditional optical microscopy, because that doesn't work. Wavelength of light is hundreds of nanometers. It can never see these small things. So this using something called scanning tunneling microscopy, a very advanced technique. I relied on that group to make some images for me. And I had about, over those years, 3 or 4 images that they were, because they had their own research, I could. And then you have to write your PhD dissertation. And I had to write the introduction and the theoretical setup and things like that. Problem was, I only had 3 or 4 images, and I'm not so much somebody who writes pages of pages and pages of text. I am quite visual and hands-on. That's why I was an experimental physicist. And I couldn't use these images in my introduction because, tada, these are also my results. It was like, yeah, I didn't want to spoil them. So I opened up CorelDRAW. That's I think, showing the age.
Yeah, I haven't heard that
to draw
name in a
these
long time.
little structures. And the way you have to imagine them, there's work it's a generative work that looks like it. It's often called diffusion limited aggregation, DLA. It's like all little blocks stuck together and forming these kind of dendritic structures. So I started to draw them, and I got bored of it quite soon. and then I had a rather naive idea, and that was around 2000. So imagine you have deadlines writing your dissertation. You're always late with that, always. The introduction is the last thing you write, because it's like, okay, I'm just going to do that in the end. And yeah, it didn't work out. And so I made, like we often do, I'm just having the computer do it. I'm going to program a computer to make these drawings for me. How hard can it be? Because I used computers to design the setup. I used computers to simulate the experiment, to run the experiment, to analyze the data. I mean, this was all software I had to write for it. So it can't be that hard to make these images, and turned out it was very, very hard. And the problem I arrived at is, although I can draw them manually, I don't know how to instruct a computer to do that. So that for me was is a new insight. It wasn't something I never realized, that there were things that computers can very easily do, and there's things that we can very easily do, and there's this kind of divide between them. Something I find very easy, like drawing these little circles touching to each other and getting the structure I have in my mind, I could not translate into instructions to the PC. So what I did is, I realized that in order to get images that looked like what I saw in the microscope, I had to create a system that behaved like reality is behaving. I have to make what we call, as a physicist, a toy model. And a toy model is actually the kind of back of the envelope calculation you do to get a sense of how something behaves. And it's something that's very important in experimental physics, because this machine has to work. And there's often areas where we have no idea, where the engineers that are working together with us also say, okay, this is beyond what we're used to, beyond our approximations and our tables. So let's just sketch it out. And so we were quite used to working that way. So I made a little system that made these drawings for me, behaving like this. And actually, it turned into half of my PhD. I postponed my PhD, and this program written to make images became a true physics simulation that became part of a predictive model. It worked. And so I spent a year on that. And then yeah, the PhD was there, and the research ended. I was supposed to help other people. I had to stop doing the work in the lab and started in the hospital, and then had this education. So I had like a period of 2 or 3 years where it was quite busy.
Yeah.
So this was shelved. I mean, I made I made these images, I used the images and shelved it. And then once I was in the hospital and I had this kind of routine, this slowly came back. And there was this feeling like there's something I should be doing and I'm not doing it. So I'm having a lot of fulfillment, of course, of family life and of my job. But there was something missing in between. And around that time, and this 2003, 2004, I discovered processing. And all these people doing these kind of silly images for no reason than the images themselves. And when I looked at them, I realized that these were actually toy molds. What people were making were toy molds, but instead of trying to emulate something or simulate something in reality, they were detached from reality. And so I went back to my code I created specifically to simulate, and I started to recreate that in processing, and went away from trying to have an attachment to anything real. And that's how it started for me. So it became, for me, the step was really simulation of reality, and then remove reality and go for something aesthetically, basically. And now we would call it generative art. I didn't know the term by then. I didn't know any term. Creative coding is actually even a term that only came a few years later. And now it is definitely generative art. I just didn't know it.
And that was like 2003, 2004, you're saying?
Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly.
I mean, you touched on so many interesting things there to me. Where to begin? This idea, like I wrote down some things. One that I like that you said, that the things where a computer is very good at doing things that a human can't, but then there's like things that a human can do very easily that seem incredibly difficult to get a computer to do. And that's something that I run into like on a daily basis, because like even, and this is a different way, obviously, but like I can cut with an X-Acto knife my collage materials like it's easy as cake. If I do that on a computer, like no matter what, I'm in a constant search for the tool that can, and I can't. There's nothing yet. There's no pen. There's no Apple Pencil. There's no fucking Wacom tablet. There's nothing that can cut as good, digitally as I can with an X-Acto knife. So I think that's such an interesting place to begin thinking about this, because then you brought that right into that, like, well, how would I draw like in a way that replicates what nature is doing? Which, I think about that a lot too, because I'm when I paint, a lot of the time I'm allowing like natural processes throughout the drawing process and trying to guide that. It's not something that you could ever paint or draw by hand, because it would look contrived for one, but also wouldn't be what it is, because that's only something that happens naturally. Like you can't replicate it. It's literally impossible, right? So then to think, okay, that a computer could do that, or that a program or something, or that programming or a language could do that, right? Like could replicate nature, because it's not actually creating a product, it's sparking a process or something, right? And so like that is where I'm at with when I think about generative art. You're probably like the third now generative artist I've interviewed where I keep coming back to this idea that generative art is somehow more like replicating natural processes than it is, I don't know, computing processes or something, or like, even though it is computing processes, but like somewhere there's, to me, this like ghost in the machine, spirituality in a computer, something, sacred geometries, yada, yada, yada. Like, do you get what I'm fucking saying here at all? Like, I know I just sound like a bunch of hot air, because I'm very much like an artist and not a coder, but this is where I'm so interested in this and so interested in generative art, and like I want to work on a generative project, and I'm trying to even just right now I'm thinking just like, how do I even start thinking about it? That's where I'm at with it. Like, how do I get my brain to think right about how doing this? And like, so anyways, this idea of like generative processes replicating natural physics or whatever, like what's happening here? What is your thoughts about this? Like what is the nature of generative art?
I think it's a very good question, because I think when we talk about generative art, we tend to get a bit mired in technical discussions. techniques. We talk about flow fields and agents, and we recognize, we look at generative art because say, oh, it's with code and it's based on that. But for me, it far more ties into what you are saying. And if I can tell a story, if we're looking at ancient humanity, if we're looking at a tribe of people which were, let's be clear from that, which were far more advanced on an individual basis than we give them credit for. We have this kind of images that people get smarter throughout the ages. We didn't. Somebody living on 150,000 years ago has the same potential as we have now. Evolution doesn't work on a scale where it's that fast that we are superior or some way have more advanced skills than them. It's not. The basis we are brought up in and we have built for ourselves is completely different, of course. But we have imagined ourselves in that situation, and we are surrounded, we are in this environment which is full of things which are alive and which are acting in some kind of way. We don't have the theories. We see this light in the skies. We have the stars. We have the moon. We have the way the water is moving. If we live at the coast, we see the sea going back and forth. There's all kinds of processes on a daily basis, on monthly things. We have tides, we have seasons, and also in long term things were different in my youth than they are now. And these are all kind of experiences. And I think it's very natural that in an environment like that, you go to something which is animism. You attribute agency to everything that is happening. And it's your way to see things. It's your way to explain what's going on. And very important, and that's what makes us human, it's our way of passing on this information to the people coming after us, to not lose everything that we have experienced. I think if you ask me what is making a human, it's the fact that our experience gets passed on. So we are not purely instinct, we are also all the experience which has been passed on in a certain way. Now, this is a very story-based way of seeing things, and in those stories, everything had this kind of soul movement, its own entity. And now I'm going to talk very Western-centric, because that's of course my path. That got more and more consolidated into a single story driven by power structures, and that all these spirits became one spirit eventually. And we passed through a phase where suddenly we were not talking spirits, we were talking gods, which were basically a extended soap family of superpower beings, trying still to explain why is there dawn, why is there dusk, what is sunset, what is sunrise, these kind of things. Why is my harvest succeeding? Why isn't my harvest succeeding this time? These kind of things. But this got more and more consolidated in a single story, and if we can draw it completely to make it a bit short, and for me it culminates at the end of the 19th century. Because at the end of the 19th century, in Western society, and in that time already spread across the world, we had this perfect clockwork universe. So it was a universe of a mechanical universe where what you needed to predict the future is you have to know what happened yesterday, you know what happens today, and you know the rules, so you have a perfect prediction of what happens tomorrow. That's the way we saw the world in the 1800s. And then the 1900s came and suddenly started throwing wrenches into everything. And we have this very popular subject, which is called quantum physics, and then the basics of the quantum mechanics suddenly said, yeah, I'm sorry, it's not all that clockwork. There's some uncertainty there. We have some weirdness in there. We also have later this mathematical revolution, which is actually for me undervalued, because it's saying, yeah, it's nice that underlying the fundamental of fundamentals of our reality is this basic uncertainty, but you don't even need the uncertainty, because even in a purely mathematical system, which is by definition deterministic, you should be able to calculate it. They are unpredictable. So you get this entire strain of non-linear mathematics, which we like to call chaos theory. These kind of things that even if you know the rules, you have no way to predict it on scale, which is okay. And for me, the prime example is if we are looking at the 1950s, it took 24 hours to make an accurate prediction of the weather 24 hours in advance. So we were just, the moment we got all the work done, we knew we could look outside and see if we were correct. Now, if I mean, we are not exaggerating if we say that the computing power has increased by a billion times. Our prediction power for weather has increased from 1 day to what? 5 days? 6 days, maybe? So not a year, not 3. So that's what this mathematics was trying to explain. Like, it doesn't matter that you can be a billion times faster or a billion times more accurate. The system will escape anyway. So that's the chaos thing. And this is something which is in science very important. In the rest of society, I think we still have very much this clockwork universe image. This image that what you need to know is how things are, how they were yesterday, how things are, and everything is very predictable. While my personal conviction, and I think we are seeing it more and more, is that everything is not about this state, but about process. If we want to describe what is going on, we cannot just describe what we see, what we measure, what is going on. We should really describe this is the process we are taking. And I see it as something which is permeating our entire society, because so far we've been talking about nature, and okay, it's hard to predict nature and weather, but we can always say that's outside our control. It's what we live in, it's normal. But it's even in our man-made structures. We have this very good idea called democracy. I think it's a very good idea. And we have this simple rule set that says, okay, if we give people a vote, and they can vote for the best leader. And if we use that process, we will get the best leader. So that's a kind of clockwork system. And we see it as a kind of state, as a kind of, if we do this, this is what happens. Mm-hmm. But it's a process, and it has its own life. And what happens is, if you have a process where you vote for people who are good at getting votes are getting the votes. Does this mean that they are the best leaders? Well, we assume, or we are not taking into account that that's not what is happening. And so now we have this process running for a while, and suddenly you have all these kind of what I call parasitic subsystems running, which are doing things that are not intentional. I mean, 2016 was never something intentional, I hope. I have more hope for humanity than thinking that the US elections result of 2016 were the direct consequence of something we planned. No, it's something that grew into the system. Why? Because these systems, the processes have their own life. The same with, like, for example, economy. Economy is meant to be a substitute, a surrogate, the best data we have for societal well-being. It's this kind of system. It's not meant to be something for itself, but somehow we have let it evolve into something which has become a goal. And instead of having something that ensures that if you are born into this world, you at least have some kind of certainty of right of existence and well-being, it's vice versa. We have created an existence where we have to do certain tasks for this abstract structure to ensure that we will have this security. Also, that is not something which was designed. It's something that grew into the system. And I think what is very important is that there is this kind of mindset, this philosophy that has to grow, which already exists in science, but it's a bit detached because it's hidden in mathematics and it's in physics. And also it's more and more in biology and in medicine. It's also coming to the foreground, is when we create these kind of processes, it's what we should follow. It's what we should look at. We should not just take them as the surrogates which perfectly represent. No, we should realize that we are introducing things. It's the same with climate change and all the solutions we are predicting. If somebody comes up with a very simple solution that says, okay, this is the very complex chain, and we are going to do this, we know this is not going to work because it will have repercussions on other things and it will always surprise us. And for me, that is the basics of generative art. If you ask me, if art is about societal change in some way as a movement, I don't believe it as the power of an individual. That's the role of generative art, because generative art is the art that examines processes. how things emerge from simple rules, and how even simple systems surprise us. And it's even with these little toys that we are making. So imagine that you scale this up a millionfold to reality. So that's for me is generative art, and something which is for me for the moment not really being expressed. It's of course there's a strong market emphasis, there's a very strong technical emphasis. But if you ask to me if there is in the future a school of generative art being discussed, what will be the central philosophy? That's the central philosophy. The fact that we are moving away of this state-like description that we have. We're going back to this process kind of thing. And actually, that kind of mindset is far closer to the original animism. We have created something and it has its own life beyond our control. So that's the long answer.
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, you, I mean, you could just talk forever and like I would just listen because you're touching on so many things and you're tying it together so perfectly. It's kind of wild actually. You must have given many like dissertations or something where you're like very
Not that much, to be honest.
well, okay, so some things I won't even touch on because we could go on forever. Like, you know, like animism is interesting just on its own. And like you're tying this all the way to, you know, what generative art is and stuff. That's fascinating. This idea of art as the art of processes. I love that as an explanation. I think when you're talking about like politics and stuff and even like democracy and these systems that we create that have an intention and then they run for a while and it turns out like, oh, it's being, you know, this other thing is actually happening, and then people tend to, and not to get like too opinion heavy or politicky or whatever, but like people want to then blame the something else where it's like, oh, this is a subversion of the system or something, right? They're like, oh, this is a bad thing that happened, we didn't mean for this, right? But it's like, no, this is actually the nature of that system, you just didn't see that. Like you just didn't, you weren't aware of how the system was going to play out, like, you know. And like, so it's not a perversion actually of what you set out to do, it's actually what happens when you set out to do what you did. You just thought a different outcome would, and it's not what you expected. Like I've thought about that a lot before, and I find that super interesting the way that you just brought that all together about processes and stuff, because I think about like how many systems are running right now at this point, if you want to bring it into like government systems throughout the world and like this network and structures of all that shit, like how many systems now are just layered on top of systems that is completely now like, when I was younger I didn't know how to understand it, but I always had this sense of like, it's too complicated. Like nobody knows how this shit works anymore. Like everything's out of fucking control. Like there's nobody that has their finger on the pulse of how all this shit's working anymore. It's like out of control. We set too many systems at play type thing. I always have that sense about the world, you know, like, so like what you're saying is super fascinating to me. And then to like bring it back to like, that's kind of the fundamentals of this art. I've never heard it put that way. And it makes generative art seem very important in not just in a market, you know, way where it's like, oh, it's hot right now and it's selling well, which has been like the dialogue, like you said, but it makes it like the art of our time in a way, you know, of like this coming back to an animism of a more complete, nuanced view of how the world works, rather than like how you said, the solid state type mentality of like, you know, this. So like, all that being said, I want to make it more personal to you. Like, what is your individual goal? Because like, yeah, okay, we're talking about the generative art is the art of processes, which makes it very timely and important to more than just, you know, more fluff abstract things, but to like really the way that society, I guess, is evolving, or we're hoping it's evolving. So like, what is your individualistic pursuit within that larger narrative? What are you trying to get to? And maybe I can preface that a little bit with just one thing that I really struck me in the rundown that we had on FakeWhale about how like nothing goes unnoticed. You see like the nanoparticles and like the drops of water, whatever, like all these little things every day. I'm similar. I always am. The details of the little everything is just always very apparent to me. Is that something that you're trying to bring out within your work, or does that play into the lexicon you're building with your work? You know, like what is the personal narrative that goes along with your pursuit within this?
Yeah, pretty much. I think if one word would capture it, it would be complexity. It's a bit right, I know, and it's probably a bit overused in the older and maybe the newer treatises on generative art. It's emergence and complexity coming from simple things. But the basic truth is, if and I don't know if you ever had this thought, but I sometimes have this thought when I'm walking down the street and you just look in front of you. What you are seeing has a complexity which is orders of magnitude beyond anything that we have ever created. Take the most complex facility, factory, whatever, with tons of plants and valves and tubes and things. And then you're just looking at the street view where you have some cracked stones and you have some weeds, you have some trees, and you have houses spanning 50 years. You have little unintentional interventions like litter or something else. And the complexity of that is literally unimaginable. You cannot scale that. We can approach it, we can simulate it, we can make an image that has it, but we will never reach that kind of complexity. And we don't even have to go to the street view. You can take a simple little stone, and that little stone in itself will have so many marks and so little discolorations and structure in there that we cannot see, or we can with a microscope see. And it's all the result of things just existing. There is no effort behind it. Nothing made it like that. It happened, and it's a fascination with that, and tied to that, it's also this kind of strange thing we have as humans, where we are looking for wonder everywhere. We are inventing things, magic. We make a machine that does something wonderful, and we don't call it a machine that we call it artificial intelligence. It has to be something big. I made a joke a few weeks ago that if tech companies which are into machine learning would make trucks, they would probably call them teleporters or something like that. we have to have this sense of wonder. Everything has to be not 3D, but 4D and 5D, and everything has to be artificial intelligence, and it has to be all the future. And the simple truth is that I slept this night, which happens. So we have this state of unconsciousness. We actually, basically, for me as an awareness, that's a state of non-existence. And then we wake up and we start existing again, and we interact with this world in all kinds of ways. And then all these things are going on. And for me, it's so why are we then looking for wonder and all these strange constructs we're creating while it's straight right in front of us? And for me, what I try to do, the need I feel in creating these kind of systems is kind of getting closer to that complexity, but through processes, through let's see what I can do with this simple thing and what is coming out of it. So that's kind of my personal approach, and then it's what I'm looking at, and I'm a creator. I'm not a builder, in the sense of I know that what I'm going to do is not going to be part of something that changes the world. Maybe indirectly through inspiration of other people that have this, of who are builders, and that's what my hope still is, that this somehow going to happen. But I know that my role is not that. I am not a community builder, or I'm not a builder of things that will change. That's not my personal path in it, I think.
That's super interesting. Again, you said so many amazing things, but like what you're talking about giving giving a sense of wonder to all these things is you had me cracking up, because it's like I think that way about it all the time. Like a lot of times when there's talk about new technologies and artificial intelligence, and then like I go and you hear about it and it sounds real grand and stuff, but then like the practical application and using it and stuff, and like my experience using AI and just I'm always keeping up with what's new, next technology, what could possibly help my vision. And most of the time when people are like being real grand about something, I get really confused after using it, because I'm like, everything just seems like stupid versions of us, like lesser versions of us already. Like we can do that already is what I think half of the time. I'm like, why did you invent this thing that can do like a shittier version of what we can already do? Like it's entertaining to me in a lot of ways, and I understand that a lot of it is new and will grow and turn into more filled out, fulfilling, I guess, things. But at the moment, there's so many technologies that are being touted that to me are just like, but why? Like, like, is this necessary? Like this, this is just a step, hopefully, towards something else. But people are like, it's, grandiose, whatever else. But anyways, like, I got a real kick out of all that. Would you say that there's some sort of like, it's not an animosity, I wouldn't say, but like, so I had a conversation with Lenny as well, Leander Herzog, and he's a generative artist, and he had a similar statement about like he was really inspired by trying to do really simple things that create complex responses and stuff like that, and almost feels like there's I don't know, maybe it is antagonistic or whatever, but it's almost like a testing of the machines, or is it like like like, is there a point that is being tried to be made with that? Like, look, it's not all that insane. Like, it's very simple. Look at, I just did this little thing and it created this crazy stuff. Like, like big deal or some, not big deal, but like, do you understand what I'm saying at all? Is there kind of like a play between that, like a dialogue, I guess?
Yeah, I've never seen it at that way as for me, because it feels like you say, it feels antagonistic. It feels like instead of trying to instill wonder in what we see, it's more trying to take away the wonder and saying it's only this.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an interesting conversation, because when you ask what are your most or what pieces would you present, I showed you Lamia, I guess, which is this poem. And Lamia is a poem which it has very famous lines in there, which are basically about cold philosophy, which is science, a kind of deconstructing the rainbow, taking away the rainbow, and hence unweaving the rainbow. It's said, and it's also the title of a book with that subject, but. Where actually trying to do this kind of analytical approach is taking away wonder, and for me it's really the opposite. For me, the idea of having emergence, having complex behavior from simple things, and not just from simple things, but complex behavior that has a higher level of description. It's not enough to just have a bowl of porridge, like we would call it, which is unique but it's not very interesting. You can create with simple systems complex behavior that you describe on another level. You don't need to go back to the rules. You can say, okay, this little blob is now going to eat the other one. You can attribute some higher level behavior to it. So for me, that's emergence. The thing that's important is the realization that this still is a toy model, something very simple, and not say, look, this is what is happening in reality. No, it's showing this is a toy model, a very simple representation we can capture in one mind of it's going on in reality. To make the step and saying that is reality is exactly the kind of thing we have been doing for so long. So to disregard what systems are really doing and keep going back to our basic rules and saying democracy is this because these are the rules, economy is this because those are our rules, and disregarding what this thing actually is doing in reality. So no, for me, that would be the opposite of what I try to do. But I think the difference is the important part is the realization. And I know it's the same with artificial intelligence and quantum and relativism, that sometimes when you have to make some kind of artistic statement, we over endow these kind of things. And I think that makes them weaker, not stronger. If somebody is making work with artificial intelligence and they are really making a point, and that's a personal view of me, that really making a point that this is a collaborative effort and that they are working together with the machine, for me that is taking away from the wonder, because it's, if you go down, if you really see what is happening, it's absolutely not what is going on. So if we would say, look, I have this simple system, like something called like Landon's ant is a very simple system, or cellular automata, and we would really insist, yeah, but the reason we are doing this is because this is what is happening in real life, that would detract from it, really. And it sometimes happens. I have to confess, it's something. It's easy to go into that territory and to make it more important. But actually, if you then think about it, you actually have undermined it completely by doing that.
Yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head, I think, with a lot of that. I couldn't agree more. So I just want to go into some of your works, if you don't mind. Like,
I don't know.
I'm sitting here looking at a lot of your works. I was looking at Lamia when you were talking about that, of course. You work in a bunch of different styles, like visually your output. I see the thread running through it all, of course, but it looks like you have a multitude of styles. So is all of this created with code to start out
Yes.
with? Is that, yes?
Everything,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, wonderful. Man, that's super interesting, because like I don't know how visually I would think about this. This is kind of generalistic about generative art in general, sorry, and I'm kind of just going on my own selfish pursuit here, because I want to understand more. But like I'm scrolling through your FakeWhale thread, okay? So you're familiar with that. And as I scroll, it's like I'm seeing this, which is really, really awesome. Absolutely love that, that's fantastic. But then the next one is this. And that's very different to me, like if you were a visual person who painted and you did those two things, people would be like, what? Or like, if you were like making that by hand, it wouldn't make sense, and then this even kind of relates to
that's
that
actually very,
other
very similar
one.
to the first one.
Yeah. This one I quite love. Is this generative?
It's generative in a sense. It's the work in itself is not generative, because it's one certain geometry, it's one certain mesh. But the way this mesh was created was as a process, in the sense that there's several ways to create this kind of 3D structure. One would be that you go into a modeling program and you model it. You start and you create it with what, or you see it as a sculpture, or in this case it's an additive process. So you would start it with something like clay, you would get your overall shape, and then you would start getting the detailing in there. That's definitely one way. It's a way I can't really work in, because for me, I don't have an image at the end. Yeah, this wonderful. I think it's the piece of art that's the most distributed from me, because it has been for a long time. It's been a free piece. This specimen, and I forgot the number, to be honest. I took a number on it, and
it's beautiful. I mean, it like looks like neurons and stuff. That one, especially, it makes a lot of sense.
I didn't have in my mind, and I never do have in mind, I want to create this. What I do have, and that's when people ask, often people say that I'm very mathematical and that I'm good in maths. For me, that's like people give me a compliment that I'm holding the brush very, very well. It's like, yeah, thank you. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's better compliments to give. Thank you. No,
Yeah, absolutely.
but still, I understand where it's coming from. It's like, what if I have this donut kind of thing, and then instead of, and I want tendrils to grow along the donut. How would I do that as a process? Oh, I start in a point, I look to another point, and it grows. This kind of branching thing. And then I want to give these branches some structure. Okay, I make them a bit fatter in the beginning, small. So I write them as processes, and I see what is coming out of them in a stepwise kind of fashion. So instead of sculpting features as I go along, I sculpture. Yeah, I can't but repeat the word. I sculpture this process. That this is what is, and I tweak that, and at a certain moment I have this result, and I like it, and at that moment I stop, and that's a big act of creation. It's okay. This is what I choose to show, and this is what you say. It looks like neurons. It looks something organic. That's not accidental, because if it wouldn't have looked like that, I would have worked more on it, or I would have discarded it, and you would have never seen it. The mere fact that you see it, that I have shown it, is this also already an act of creation, because I probably had 100 other things that I never show. So it's not generative in the sense. It could be generative because there is some randomness in it. It could generate untold copies of versions of that. So in that sense, it's generative, but it's mostly generative because it has been really working about how to create it, and not this is what I want to create. How do I get closer to that? And if I can offer a critique to generative art, as it is often now portrayed, is a lot of people now are doing the exact opposite, and they are, this kind of image is successful. How do I create this kind of image? And it's fine. It's okay for people to do that. But for me, it goes against generative art, because it's not only about the way you make it, but also the process itself, what you want to examine. And for me, generative art is not the art form that says, I want to create this kind of shape. But about my work, there's different styles, definitely. There's different. So I always see it as I have several threads of work going on. Some of these threads are really old, started in 2003, 2004. The first one you showed, which is actually more a demonstration of an idea. That one is in itself, it's very nice, but it's definitely it's more of a statement. It's actually me claiming, let's say, this is my idea for reasons. I found it necessary at a certain moment to really say, look, this is the idea. This is something that is going back to 2006 at least, and it in itself it looks nice, but the idea behind it is also quite nice. And it's in the beginning, in 2003, 2004, I was very inspired by architecture. I still am, to be honest. And I always found it a shame that you, on one hand, have something called generative art, and on the other hand, you have something called you have certain schools in architecture, procedural architecture, and other not so nice names, but they are doing exactly the same thing, but with more constraints, and they are very advanced to that. I mean, if you would look what Bartlett School of Architecture in London did in 2008, I mean, they're still way ahead of anything that is now being released as generative art. But still, there's kind of disconnect. I find it unfortunate. But you do see more and more architects, I think, coming out with work and gaining recognition. How do we go? So very architectural, yes. And so the idea is you have this cube, and one of the very first pieces I made in processing that got shown was a cube that got subdivided. It's always nice to have subdivision because subdivision gives you different scales, gives you randomness. It gives you a lot of possibilities to play, and it's not that hard to do. The only thing was you get these bubbly kind of structures, and they don't have a physical reality because they intersect. You couldn't make a sculpture. You could make a sculpture of it, but you had to do some things, and it's something that a lot of people discovered when they're going to things like 3D printing or plotting, that it's okay if you make it on the computer to make it reality. It's a different kind of story. There's a lot of work to be done to get something digitally to something materialized, and it's an interesting process. I do advise everybody to at least try it at some time, especially for people like me who really got into the digital without going through the material phase. And the idea was, if I had this kind of cube, what can I do with this cube to change it? What kind of simple things can I do to manipulate it repetitively, iteratively, after each other, to create something complex, but without destroying its physicality, without making it an impossible thing to exist. And there was one process, the slice and dice, where I realized that I slice it in half. Okay, then I have two halves, can put them together, and I do something with one half, like rotate it or move it along this slice. Then I'm changing the object, but I'm not changing its mass. I'm not changing its physicality. It can still exist, and it's something you can repeat. And that's actually the basics of this entire of this series, and it's something I've been doing a long time. And it's very nice because depending on what kind of operations you do, how you constrain it to move, you can get everything from architecture-like things to fractured kind of objects. And that is actually this one GIF is actually showing the basic principles, the things you can do of the original system, that is slice and translate, slice and rotate, slice and squish it, which doesn't change the volume, and slice and skew it. And that is just so. And if you add everything together, you get this very interesting dynamic of a simple shape becoming this complex assembly. But the nice thing is, in the end, all the parts are there to reassemble. It's kind of like a puzzle you create.
Yeah, I watched it like 20 times just now. Like in watching it while you're describing it is really great, because it actually very nicely encapsulates the exact thing that you were saying about very simple systems creating something complex. And then you said it right at the end, because it literally starts as a square, and then like from that it becomes like some of the complexities of it are completely unexpected. I urge everybody listening to this, when they listen, to view it. It's in the FakeWhale thread if that helps. But it like some of the configurations that it comes up with, you would never expect if you were to tell somebody like, yes, these are the rules that I gave this system. It was like cut in half, blah blah blah, and it comes up with these crazy things, it's a very beautiful way of explaining exactly your point earlier of the simple systems creating complex results, and then also showing the unexpected nature of that too, where it's like, okay, this one looks like a Frank Lloyd Wright rebuilding or something. All of a sudden,
Exactly.
like,
Yeah,
how did it get there?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's fucking awesome. And then like, I know that we're running a little long, but I want to touch on this piece too, just because I really like it. This one here,
Yeah,
it's very architectural in a way, it looks like, but then you also have included these more organic forms that almost look like arteries or coral or something intermingled with that, which I find super interesting. Could you talk a little bit about this piece?
Yeah. So that's one of the what I would now call the isoverses, because everything is a verse nowadays. In 2018, actually in 2016, I bought a pen plotter, because it was a fancy thing to have. These
a pen plotter, did you say?
This an axi draw from Evil Mad Scientist Laboratory, which is a fantastic name until they get your credit card blocked because you ordered something. And I really got somebody from the credit card company on the line asking me, did you order something from Evil Mad Scientist Laboratory? And I'd say, yes, and it's a legitimate company. I don't think they're really evil mad scientists, or it would be a bad name. So no, they really got the first order really got my credit card blocked because I ordered from evil mad scientists.
And just before you continue, I was looking at your Twitter this morning. Is that this?
That's one of those. So I have several right now.
Cool.
The first one in 2016, and then because I saw this, and there's this hashtag called Plotter Twitter, which shows you the incredible things people are doing with it, and I really liked it because I so far was purely digital. I did a few workshops, or one workshop where we explored a bit 3D printing, where you have these kind of plasticky things, which the materiality of it I immediately disliked, so I never did that again for some reason. But the plotting thing I really liked, and I bought that machine and I got it, and then I realized there was nothing I could plot. I mean, the simple experiments everybody does in bidding, but nothing that's so it just sat around gathering dust. And in 2019, I decided, okay, I want to make something from scratch specifically meant to be plotted in a style that is still something I want to explore. So something architectural, something having to do with compositing volumes, something like that, but meant to be plotted. So that constraint. So it's not, I have made many experiments and pieces that work with volume, that additive and subtract dynamic volumes, things like that. It's in 3D. You can see it on your screen, but yeah, there is again no physicality to them. Those do not translate to a plotter. So I made this system. It's this one isometric perspective. I have a lot of pieces in that. The very nice thing about this isometric perspective is that everything is taking place on this fixed grid. It's technically it's an equilateral triangle grid, but let's call it a grid of hexagons. So every little cube you can draw is a little hexagon, and you add them together. So that's kind of the background. And because it's on a fixed grid, it's quite straightforward. I have to be careful. I say easy too much. It's never easy, but it's pretty straightforward. And it's a language thing, but it's straightforward to turn that into lines. And a pen plotter can draw lines. And the idea was I have rules that make 3D structures composed of blocks. We would call them voxels now. But so in voxels, you are trying to create beautiful images, realistic images composed of little blocks. And what I'm trying to do, I'm not trying to hide the little blocks in the image. No, they're my building elements. They're where I start from. And with all kinds of rule sets, I imagine, which can be additive, like, okay, start adding material, or they can be subtractive, like start slicing or removing material, combinations of the two. Also, like in that one, there's some noise in there where there's noise distributed in space, and where the noise has a certain level, it eats away at the structure. So it looks a bit, destroyed. Create these, and these are then directly translatable to something my pen plotter can make. And then you have very silly things like I'm going to put it on the side, which is also a voxel structure. But if you take some distance, there is nothing voxel about it anymore. It's nothing pen plotter. It's not a traditional 3D structure. This is actually the same structure as what you showed me, but on a different scale and a different generation. That's another geometry recipe, I would call them, behind it. So for me, that's the start of the Isoverse. Was really, I wanted to create something specifically to be materialized by this pen plotter, which was a nice challenge, and it worked out really well. And I'm still making them. I'm not plotting them as much because as complexity grows, plot time increases, and I'm not that invested in creating 36 or 48-hour plots. I do make complex plots, but they have different pen bits. No, for me, if the plot takes more than 8 hours, then it's not meant to be plotted.
That's a long time. Yeah, like how
That
long?
is a long time
like
for
the one you showed me.
now.
Well, the one you showed me, how long was that?
This one is a 2 width, so it has the outlines and the inlines. It's probably something like 4.5 hours.
Okay,
So
that's
something
really
like
interesting.
40
That's
to
really
60 meters of lines.
beautiful. I saw
Yeah.
those as soon as we began talking. I saw those on the wall back there, and they looked very interesting. That's
Normally
a cool
they're not on
machine.
there. They put there specifically for the interview. That's why they detach that easily. They're just stuck on there with
Just taped up there.
painting masking tape. It was just I realized that wall was blank, so I put them there.
Yeah, perfect. Well, that worked out perfectly. Well, I really appreciate your time. I really want to just touch on one more thing before we wrap this up, and that's what you minted for FakeWhale, because I just saw that. These ones, to me, it's like you have a series of works that are similar, kind of in this this look and in this complexity and this density. These look to me, I mean, everybody I'm sure says this, but it's like, an angle of a city, from high up or something like that is probably what. Well, maybe that's just me, but I would assume most people see that. Could you tell me what is the inspiration behind this piece, or like what was the inception that brought this series of work together?
It's a continuation of the one you showed before. So I actually basically have two kinds of isoverse pieces. One are the structures, like the one you showed, but I also have pieces where when I generate these structures with random rules, they are composed of parts which are detached from each other. So at a certain point, I decided to take all these parts and start sorting them, start putting them on the grid. And what it gives you is like what you say, the one that is going to be minted, or the one that is going to be part of the vault, is one of those pieces. And if you look at them, you have this sense of perspective of something else. And depending on the type of structures that I use, it can look like a machine or like a microchip or like a city. Most of the city. The thing is, if you go into it and start looking, it does strange things, especially the one, these are, so this is the opposition series, I think, where you actually have possibilities in there. It's definitely, not a perspective because you have inverted pieces, pieces which are upside down, but still the overall view works. But if you go in closer, it kind of traps the eye. It makes the eye wander because you have...
It's so much fun on an iPad. You can just scroll around in here forever. Like, this is so cool.
And they
like,
make
this is the way to experience
very
this.
beautiful prints. If to have this one in large size on your wall, it really traps, it captures the eye. And it's already the case with the normal ones where you just order, because this is not a real perspective. None of my structures are obscuring another one. They are nicely tiled next to each other. This is something that doesn't happen. This is not a city. It is a representation. It gives people the sense of being something until you get a closer look, and then it's like something is off. And these pieces are worse. So these are, I think this is an opposition piece which has two orientations, two colors. So some of the pieces are upside down compared to the other ones. If you would look at the red and the blues, the perspective is different. I also have the so-called how did I call them? The disoriented. I just forgot the name of my own art.
I do that all the time.
There was a time where I didn't even call it art. I called it constructs because I didn't want to call myself an artist.
Yeah, it's loaded, right? It like you take on a lot of different nuances once you start using those words. Like your responsibility increases or something.
Yeah,
it's almost like you have shadows in parts though. Like this almost looks like a shadow of that building. Like I don't know. And like
there are shadows, but the composition itself doesn't shadow on each other. But that's it doesn't matter. I mean, it captures enough things to guide the eye and to start imagining things that are not there in there. But the disorient pieces, that's what I call I wasn't sure if it was disorientation or disorient, but the disorient pieces, the orientation of the different pieces is completely random. And I have several of them on Versum, and they look okay, but when you get closer, it really
Is this kind of that?
No, this one is closer to it's a bit older.
This one definitely, I'm seeing the sorry to anybody that's just listening and not watching this, but this one you definitely see that these are very different perspectives, you know, like
Exactly.
very
So
clearly.
the latest one, especially with and this is especially for fun for the people watching who are not seeing it, especially with the big white piece. That's really capturing it. The lower band, which has the big inverted white piece, is really making it clear. That's why I selected that one. But so that's actually taking it further, and it wasn't. That's something that was born as a silly experiment. Let's take the parts and have the machine sort them, because I'm not making these manually. So the structures are being generated in the background, taken apart, put onto the grid. Next structure is generated, put on there. I have some control about the order it does it in.
Mm-hmm.
And what came out, and I have been exploring this ever since, is indeed this sense of, although this is really just 2D images stuck to each other, it gives you all these kind of different interpretations. And this idea of 3D, it's not real. It's almost like it's not like Escher, if you know the Dutch.
Of course, yeah,
Artist,
fucking love Escher.
His drawings have these impossibilities really in the construction of the drawing. These are not like that, but still the way they are put next to each other, it gives you these impossibilities. So it's for me, it was reminiscent of that. And I've always been a big fan, and I'm spending part of my holiday and next year to go to Den Haag, because he has his big museum there. So
Escher does. Yeah, Escher does.
Yeah,
Has a big
Escher
museum there,
has a, that's on my plans to visit next week, actually.
awesome.
So
That's
that's
really
a
cool.
big inspiration, not in the sense von I want to copy his style, but the fact that he was also playing with this idea of you have this drawing representing something spatial, but you don't have to really adhere to all the rules. You can change the rules, and it looks fine, and then it traps your eye, it traps your mind, and you go into them, and they in this attention economy, these are very worthwhile things to do, because people get stuck in them for a few seconds, which is more than what you normally get.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad you brought up Escher, because there's definitely an Escher vibe running through all this, and I'm a fan of Escher. I actually was lucky enough that 2018 I was in Australia and just like on tour with a band, and just so happened that Escher was having there was a huge Escher retrospect in Melbourne, and it was fucking awesome. It was so cool. It was Escher, and then the whole thing was put together by a design firm. So it was Escher times something, but the design firm, all they did was design the environment for his work to live within. So it was so cool, like, because they were trying to echo his work within the way that the architecture of the building and the way you walk through it. It was gorgeous. And so now just maybe real quick, do you know, did Escher do any generative work, or was generative art not a thing at the time of his life? But I don't know if he was alive during that time or not, or whatever, but it seems like he would like it. Like he would dig generative art.
He didn't encounter generative art in that sense, but he definitely worked with what we would call rule-based systems, which are very close to generative art. And
is that like Saul DeWitt?
The way he explored it, yeah. But the way he explored it is he has these bands of patterns that change. So he has the fishes that turn into birds, and the lizards which tile into each other. Yep. He actually had a rule-based system to create those. And the way he explored them is very close to generative. Of course, generative, not computationally, but generative doesn't have to be computational. But he definitely explored these kind of systems, which were very mathematical at the basis, and found rules how to make these patterns, these mosaics, these changing patterns. So he wouldn't have been, I think, if his life period would have been shifted 25, 30 years, he would have definitely explored that. You never know what somebody would do.
Mhm.
He was a very
Of course,
classical.
yeah.
I mean, he didn't have to use a computer to be able to draw, which is something I have to do. But still,
you touch on something, a system-based art or whatever, and like I was in London a few weeks ago, and there was some talks about on generative art or whatever, and somebody brought up a term, or not a term, I'm sorry, a person, an artist that and then I wondered, I'm like, would he be considered a generative artist or not? Are you familiar with the artist Sol LeWitt?
Yeah, Sol LeWitt is, Sol LeWitt is
system-based.
No, but he's definitely generative because what he was setting up was processes. He set up processes art also, but that doesn't mean that all his work is by definition generative. A lot of his work is system-based, explorative, but he also has rule-based things. To be honest,
I found him very interesting. Yeah.
I don't mind the discussions about schools and terminology. I've like we are having now, is this artist generative or not? The thing that sometimes strikes me is that it often comes up when it's discussions that start from discussions about worth and value. We know, for example, now generative art is a term which is worth a lot of money. And often the discussion is held, but it's a disguised discussion to say, well, I don't think this is worth anything, and this is because this is generative and this isn't. And for me, that's the wrong discussion to have, of course. But there is, and it's when the academic discussion of how would I classify this type of music becomes involved in the market that I actually don't like it. That I think it's difficult. But if you're in music, it's the same thing. At a certain moment, there's this obsession with style and sub-style and genre, subgenre, subgenre. You have these ridiculous charts of metal genres going into seven layers deep. Where you say, I made the joke that at school I wanted to start a band, but we couldn't define our genre, so we never made music. Sometimes it feels a bit like this, and so that's why I don't get.
I agree. I completely agree. Like, I don't get too stuck on that. I'm huge into music too, and I totally understand, especially within like subgenres of like, okay, I like metal and black metal or death metal or there's countless kinds of fucking metal, and it's like, who gives a shit? But anyways, the reason I question these things is more for my own curiosity of like wanting to know which process that like an artist chose, like because I know that a generative means that they didn't put pencil to paper, right? But maybe a system-based artist did.
That's actually not true, Jesse, because I can show you generative art which is done with pencil on paper. Wait. So this is dice, paper, and notebook.
Dice, paper, notebook, right?
Look, this is
like
writing down.
Dice. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, this is writing down some rules, and then just rolling the dice and follow the rules. So,
I hear you.
But yeah, for me it's and it's not entirely correct, and it's I mean, I wouldn't get an art academy PhD by it. It's for me, the aspect of generative comes in is when what you are creating is again the process. What you're tuning, what you're working on is the process, and you see what comes out of it. Traditional art, which has no negative connotations for me to say it like that, but I really want to make clear is this is what I want to create, and it's not black and white. If you paint, if you sculpt, the material you work with will influence what you create. It's the grain of the paper influences what you draw. It's never a fully let's say non-generative process. It always, but generative is really starting from a certain dynamic thing, and seeing it evolve. And of course, in the act of creation, there's a traditional art approach in the sense that I will tune it based on the results, and it's the results I evaluate. Oh, and I'm not liking this result. I undo the change. I look for something else. So in my pruning and searching of paths, this is very much a traditional approach, because I am basing myself on the result. The only thing is, the results can sometimes surprise me, but I also believe in traditional art it happens
all the time. The best shit happens that way.
Yeah. So it's the division is not that hard between the two, but for me it's a kind of direction of intentionality that says this is generative, this is traditional, but it's yeah, I mean it just descriptors, say two boxes, and almost nothing fits perfectly in the box. I think that's
that's perfect. I love this entire conversation. I think this is a perfect place to wrap it up. We're at an hour and a half, which is perfect. I learned a lot, and honestly, I'm writing down my own notes on my own work and like ideas I've had as you've been talking about what I'm gonna do, and sometimes forgot that we were recording. So, anyways, this was one that I really enjoyed. So before we wrap this all up, is there anything that you would like to promote? Do you have a show coming up? Do you have a drop coming up? Do you want to point anybody in any direction for any reason?
Whoa, that's a surprise. No, not really, actually. I've just invite people to.
Where are you minting?
I'm
where are you minting the most lately?
I'm minting the most on Versum for the moment. I really
That's cool to hear.
Yeah, I really like the platform. I really like the people behind the platform.
Okay.
People who know my history a bit know that I come from known origin as my Genesis platform.
Okay.
A year and a half ago, but I really in March last year started out. For me, the real start was Hiket Nunk, a platform with its own history. And for me, Versum is the continuation of the work I did on there. And depending on what I create, some of the things I are a better fit for different platforms. So, of course, yeah, there's FX Hash, where I do not that much work, but the things that fit there, I release there. I'm not really a platform fanboy. It's not what but I also think it's not a good idea to, at a single point in time, spread myself out too thin. As I do have this full-time job. It's not like I have hours and hours and hours to spend. My community work does suffer a bit with that. I cannot follow everything that's going on.
Yeah.
But still, so I would invite people to follow me on Twitter. If you like what you see, keep following me. If you don't like what I see, stop following me. It's your feed. Please feel free to do whatever you want. I think we are imposing ourselves far too much rules on these social things. Do what works for yourself, and I hope to see you around.
Amen.
Somewhere.
Yeah, amen to that. Well said. Really like the attitude. I definitely will keep following, and I like what you're saying about Versum. I definitely need to go back to it, because I was really into that when it first came out, and I haven't spent much time on there. But it does seem, I like that your Hickek Nunk is turning into the Versum, or Versum is your continuation of the work there, because that's really cool. So anyways, great. We'll be following along. This was a fantastic talk. Thank you so much. Everybody go check out Frederik